The onset of the global health situation early last year had a great many effects, one of them being the replacement of all other forms of important news from around the world. And it's for this very reason that you may not have already heard about the massive protests taking place in India right now, along with the farmers that are responsible for kicking the protests into action. But what is the reason behind this surge outcry by the farmers? And since when has this massive effect been going on? Well, whether you're an Indian citizen or just interested in world events, you've definitely come to the right place, as we're about to explore everything there is to know about the farming protests currently taking place in India. So strap yourselves in and get ready for some shock and awe, as things are about to get interesting. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications turned on so you don't miss any of the new videos that we post. The protests in a nutshell. The 2020-2021 Indian Farmers Protest, as it has come to be called, is an ongoing protest against 3 farm acts that were passed by the Parliament of India in September of last year. According to sources, it didn't take long for farmers and their workers to rise up against what Parliament had done, taking to the streets at Singhu and Tikri near to the Delhi border as soon as they were able. And according to reports by Haryana police, as of 21st of March 2021, around 40,000 Indian citizens had committed themselves to the protest action. Farmer unions in India and their representatives have demanded the acts in question to be repealed and have stated that on many occasions that there will be no compromise in their demands. And considering just how important the farming sector is, especially in the overpopulated country of India, it's only a question of time as to when the government will have to give in to these demands. This hasn't stopped Parliament from trying as far as compromises go. The Supreme Court of India, for example, has issued a stop order, which has the effect of placing the effects of these farm acts on ice. This is, however, only until the controversial situation has been able to be resolved, with the stop order being cancelled as soon as the protesters and government can reach a decision as to how to proceed on the matter. The protest leaders have also rejected the government's proposal to suspend the laws for a total of 18 months. In the minds of the protesters, this was nothing more than a stalling tactic of the government, who had absolutely no indication of leading to the eradication of the laws in the long term, which is what they actually want. To date, there have been approximately 11 rounds of talks between the protest leaders and government, but as you can imagine, none of these talks have been conclusive. Since not much has happened on the front of repealing the acts, threats of violence have started to rear their ugly heads. In fact, protest leaders actually stated as long as the farm acts remain in effect, there is a possibility that the protesters may resort to overthrowing the government. With the storming of the capital this year being fresh in the minds of the protesters, their ability to overthrow Parliament and the government of the country in general might not seem too far-fetched at the end of the day. 6 state governments, being Kerala, Punjab, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Delhi, and West Bengal, have passed resolutions against the repulsive farm acts. At the same time, 3 states, being Punjab, Chhattisgarh, and Rajasthan, have tabled counter legislation acts against the acts at their respective state assemblies. None of these pieces of counter legislation have been passed by the respective state governors, though, which is needed before they actually become law. In other words, the powers that have been determined that even though the people and a majority of the government do not want these acts to be operational, they will continue to run effectively. No wonder the protests have been going on for so long. More about the background to the farm acts. In order to fully understand what is happening in India right now, we have to look back to 2014, when the agriculture census in India identified that farmers have small land holdings, which is one of the reasons why they were not able to meet their needs. It was also found that around 2/3 of the land holdings in the country are less than 1 hectare. Worse yet, because farmers weren't meeting their needs as a result of not owning enough land, many other issues were identified, including a very high farmer suicide rate, along with the state of the economy of India in general. This fueling of the farm acts were also dependent on the statements made by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh back in 2004 about the onset of a green revolution. In his own words, Singh said the following: "We need a second green revolution, making use of modern advances. For that, we need to revitalize India's research agricultural system, India's extension system, India's credit system. The more we commercialize our agriculture, the more our farmers need access to commercial inputs, and that was a modernization of our agriculture credit system. It is our intention to remove all these handicaps which come in the way of India realizing its vast potential as one large common market." In other words, it was already back in 2004 that the government of India was looking to its farming sector to help to boost the economy. It seemed as if farmers were very much farming for their own survival rather than using their skills to prop up the economy of the country as a whole. This is essentially what the government wanted to change. In 2017, the central government released the Model Farming Acts, but it appeared as if the reforms suggested had never actually been implemented, which led to a committee consisting of 7 chief ministers being set up in 2000 2019 to discuss their implementation. Following this establishment, the central government decided to promulgate 3 ordinances, otherwise known as temporary laws, which dealt with agricultural produce, their sale, hoarding, agricultural marketing, and contract farming reforms. The ordinances were introduced as bills, which ended up being passed by Lok Sabha on the 15th and 18th of September last year. On the 20th and 22nd of September, the 3 bills were passed by Rajya Sabha through the use of a voice note, ignoring the request of the opposition for a full vote. The bills were then signed into law by the president of the country on the 28th of the same month, which converted them into the farm acts that are currently being protested against right now. A look at the specific acts. The first act that farmers have been rising up against is the Farmers' Produce, Trade and Commerce, Promotion and Facilitation Act, which essentially expands the scope of trade areas of farmers' produce. This means rather than having specified areas, any place of production, collection, and aggregation can be designated as a trade area of a farmer. In other words, this allows for the electronic trading and e-commerce of scheduled farmers' produce, which is a far cry from how farming has always been in India. The second act is the Farmers' Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act, which creates a framework for contract farming through an agreement between farmers and buyers before the production or rearing of any farm produces. And where this results in problems based on the produce actually made, the act also provides for a 3-level dispute settlement procedure, which has to be followed. Last but not least, we have the Essential Commodities Amendment Act, which allows for the center to regulate certain food items in the course of extraordinary situations like war and famine. It essentially requires that the imposition of any stock limit on agricultural produce be based on price rise, which would bring about staunch limitations to farmers in these circumstances. The nitty-gritty of the protest. It was after the reading of these acts that the farmer unions in India started to believe that they were essentially aimed at the opening of the sale and marketing of agricultural produce outside of the Agricultural Produce Market Committee, APMC, mandate for farmers. The laws also seem to allow interstate trade and aim at changing the farming system of the country forever by encouraging a hike in the electronic trading of agricultural produce. And while the latter element might sound very useful to a farmer that already has a solid understanding of technology and how it can be used to make farming easier, the same cannot be said about Indian farmers. Remember, the majority of these farmers don't even own a shred of technology, which means that it will never be able to make a living when they are competing against corporate farmers that have access to things they don't. Last but not least, these new acts prevent state governments from collecting a market fee, cess, or levy for trade outside of the APMC markets. And while it might be true that less fees collected from farmers, the better, there appears to be a nefarious purpose of this eradication. According to farmer unions, the overall consensus among farmers is that the laws are aimed at the removal of their current relationship with the mandi system, which will eventually deteriorate and cease to exist. This would leave farmers at the mercy of corporations. Furthermore, farmers in India also believe that these laws will end their existing relationship with agricultural small-scale businessmen who usually act as middlemen by providing financial loans to ensure the timely procurement of crops. Without the use of these middlemen, many farmers would end up failing and being replaced by corporate ventures. What do you think about it all? Feel free to let us know in the comment section down below.